Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Monologue. I'm your host for the afternoon. And today my guest is Calvin Normore, who is the Brian P. Copenhaver Professor of Philosophy at UCLA and a bunch of other things. Calvin, what does the P stand for? Calvin, I have no idea, but I'm glad to be here, and I'm grateful to Florian Fischer for having arranged this interview. Brian will have to tell us. So, Calvin, can you tell us a little bit about your interests and your background? How did you get into philosophy and why? Well, it all began in a bookstore. Actually, there was no bookstore, in a drugstore in Cornerbrook, Newfoundland, many years ago. But I came upon on a rack Jacques Maritain's Preface to Metaphysics and Remford Bambro's selections from Aristotle. And they cost $1.95 each. I bought them both. And I couldn't understand a word, but I knew there was plenty of depth here. So that got me interested in philosophy. And then later, as an undergraduate, I was doing math and philosophy. I became interested in tense logic. And through one of my teachers there, got interested in the work of Arthur Prior. Prior died before I could study with him, but the influence has remained ever since. And so I've been interested in modal and tense logic in its medieval background, which Prior emphasized. But the truth is I'm interested in everything. So Calvin, what's your current project or projects? What are you working on now and why? My spouse, Deborah Brown, and I have just finished a book. Actually, we finished it some time ago, but we finished finishing it on Descartes and the ontology of everyday life, trying to argue for a non-reductionist view of Descartes. And now I think we'll do some work in early modern philosophy, particularly on Hobbes, but I'm going to go back to my first love, which was medieval theories of modality, because I thought, and time, because I think those are intertwined and they're real significance for what's going on now in metaphysics and logic. That brings us to this conference. What are you doing here, and what do you make of what's going on at the conference? Well, the meeting has two parts, a little reading course that's taking the first part of the week and a more formal conference in the latter part. And in the first part, what I've been doing essentially is talking about medieval modal theory, particularly Occam's, and its relation to time, and focusing on problems of future contingents. Occam has a distinctive theory of future contingents, which is turning out to be also one of the more popular modern theories. And people don't seem to know much about his own work, so this seemed like a good opportunity to present it. Later on in the conference, I'll talk a little bit about perfect agency, if all goes well. What would it take to be a perfect agent? So, Calvin, what do you think is, from your perspective, the most interesting thing about the work that you've done? What is it and when did it happen? Well, we have to go back, I think, all the way perhaps to 1970 or 71. I'm a graduate student at the University of Toronto, and Charles Chastain comes to give a talk. And he talks about what turns out to be the causal theory of names, which of course, Kripke's work is in that area, and to some extent Ruth Marcus's and others have been more famous. But Charles showed me something. And what it showed me was that the work I was doing on Occam was actually very close to what was then happening in philosophy of language, which was also very close to what was then happening in contemporary metaphysics. And I began to see that Occam had an account of how language worked that was a real alternative to quantification theory, and that was really promising philosophically. And that energized me in a way nothing probably before or since has. And I saw how it interacted with the work I was doing on modality and time, and the rest is history, as they say. Well, thank you, Calvin. It's been a pleasure interviewing you. Yes, and thank you, Florian, for arranging this. It's a pleasure being a guest interviewer. Well, thank you, Calvin, for interviewing me. It's very seldom that we get to meet face to face like this, and I'm very glad of it. So thank you, thanks Spot, and Thanks, Lori.